The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our second day of our 2020 Great Plains Partners in Cancer Screening Conference. We're happy and excited you're all here. We are a little disappointed that we can't meet in person, but due to COVID-19, concerns and safety, we want to make sure everybody's safe but still can meet. So this is our new platform, our virtual meeting, and we're excited you're all here. You are currently all muted. We will unmute you guys after each presentation for questions. Then you will also have to unmute yourself if you want to ask a question verbally. You can also put questions into the question box if you have them, and we'll answer those at the end of each presentation as well. Let's see. So also, the other thing is in the handouts box, I have put all the presentations in there for if you would like to use them or need them for anything. I also put a picture of the day 2 drawing. It's a Pendleton laptop case. So what that is if you complete our evaluation, you will be, at the end of the conference, you will be entered into a drawing for that Pendleton laptop case. And we'll announce the winner tomorrow. I also put the link to the evaluation in the chat box. So at the end of this conference, please click on the chat box on that link and complete our evaluation. Also, in terms of that, the winner from, excuse me, from yesterday's evaluation drawing was Viola Fontaine. So congratulations, Viola. We're very excited that you won. I think it was a Pendleton duffel bag. In terms of the evaluation, just know that to be entered into the drawing, please provide your name and mailing address at the end of the form. The Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board, which is us, will not have access to your name or mailing address. Only our external learning partner, Asset Inc., will see your survey results. No one outside of Asset Inc. will see any identifiable information. So again, we want to know what works, what doesn't, and we appreciate all feedback from you. So please fill out the evaluation. That helps us in learning to continue to put on conferences and to continue to better ourselves in putting those conferences on. So is there anything else? Oh, I also want to, as you can see, we have a multitude of people on the screen here, and I just want to say a thank you to all the staff that for the prevention programs, Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Health Board Preventions Program. They have worked tirelessly and very passionate about this conference, and it definitely is a team effort, and I could not have done it without you guys. So I just want to introduce everybody here that's worked on that, and that's Richard Musso, Deanna Swan, Eugene Gallego, Ashley Kitchen, she's our external evaluator from Asset, Don Arkinson, Kelly LeBeau, and Gina Johnson. So thank you guys so much. Your team effort and your passion for the work that we do for our tribal partners and tribal communities does not go unnoticed. So thank you very, very much. With that, our next thing then is that we will have an opening prayer, and we have asked Mr. Daryl Redcloud if he will do our opening prayer for us, and that is Don's husband that will be coming to do that. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and it's an honor to say this prayer for you all. If you all could bear along with me, I'll use some of the Lakota language as well, a little bit of English. O heche tukashida wakanta heche. Leompetu kile heche ake tokahi ache wopilon kini chapi. Ishake heche okola ki tikile heche. Taku heche wokuje oyate wokuje ki hena. Na zania upikta. E wogla kapi. They pray that through their programming and through their promotions and so forth, they can help the people to better their health and be aware of certain things that might affect their health. O heche tukashila hechumse iche chichilo heche. Mitaki o ishake chitaku wakan yakaga. Ishake che katie topa hena heche. Ishake che otagi ho heche yote kia umpi. Ho heche kujapi. Ho heche we chose on the el umpi chimpi. And now she we chala yo heche tukashida wakantaka. Nishnala wanika. Nishnala taku yasi chetu. Heche ake heche taku wakan yakaga heche. And now oyasi heche mitaki oyasi. Oh. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the prayer, Daryl. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker today, Rodney Haring. And before we begin, I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit about Rodney. Rodney is a director for the Roswell Park Center for Indigenous Cancer research faculty at Roswell Park Comprehensive Cancer Center's Office of Community Outreach and Engagement, Department of Cancer Prevention and Control, and adjunct faculty at the Native American Research and Training Center for the University of Arizona. He is also a past fellow at the National Congress of American Indians and Mayo Clinic. Dr. Haring is Beaver Clan and is enrolled member of the Seneca Nations of Indians and resides in Cattaraugus Indian Reservation. And I hope that I said that perfect this time, Rodney. So he also holds a doctoral degree in social work, over 15 years of social work and practices. A former delegate on the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and American Indian and Alaskan Native Health Research Advisory Council. He is also the lead delegate for the historic MOU between Roswell Park and Indian Health Services with the common mission of addressing health burdens in Indigenous communities. In 2017, he was awarded an Impact Award by the National Indian Health Board. His research interests intersects eliminating disparities and encouraging resilience with the First Nations and Indigenous societies. So at this time, I would like everyone to have their microphones muted if they are not muted. And also, if you do have a question, please go ahead and type in your question in the question box or the chat box.
Muted. Unmuted.
At this time, we'll go ahead and begin, and I will go ahead and pull your presentation up, Rodney, and begin sharing. Okay. All right, Rodney, you can go ahead and begin.
Okay, that's better. Well, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate the invitation to kind of share and some of the things that we've been doing over time and how that may translate to some of the initiatives that you see both in the practices in your area and region and in the communities. And so I kind of titled the presentation around the science of sovereignty and Indigenous knowledge across the cancer care continuum. And usually, I always like to acknowledge too, with respect, that the land we're in our respective spaces are traditional ancestral homelands. The Indigenous nations across Turtle Island and recognize Indigenous peoples as original stewards of the lands. And so right now we're kind of virtually sitting in our ancestral homeland, so it's hard to really pinpoint exactly what tribes are from, but just I put that out there that we often are sitting in our ancestral homelands, even if it isn't a reserve or a reservation but we are often are right in our homeland. So we just want to acknowledge that. And thank you for the invitation. So the objectives I want to share today are kind of along the lines of, you can go to the next slide, Eugene. One, talking about the cancer care continuum. Screening is part of that, and so you'll hear bits and pieces on screening and the relationship to other parts of the cancer care continuum. Indigenous cancer research, Indigenous knowledge and the terminology around two-eyed seeing, translational science and pandemics, some information about our Center of Indigenous Cancer Research, and then looking forward and what that means for our future generations. Next slide. And so I'll start by sharing some of our Haudenosaunee or Iroquois philosophies and who we are and what that means. And you think about these things and what they mean to you and your communities and to the places that you work in. The Haudenosaunee are known as the people of the Longhouse. You may have heard of our Confederated Nations, Native Nations in New York and Southern Ontario, Canada, as the Iroquois or the Iroquois. And we have we do have the oldest treaties in the United States with George Washington, and some of these treaties that we use from healthcare position ourselves as a sovereign nation, and that's what I want to kind of emphasize too, is that we are Native nations with sovereignty, and the ability to use that for our work in the cancer care continuum is part of our ancestral birthright as Native nations. And so I always try to kind of entangle that into the conversation, whether it be in grant writing or whether it be in our community relations on and off reservation. And part of that is a two-row wampum in our area. And what that is you'll see two purple strands there with among kind of a white wampum background. And what that representation is that in our experience with people that have come here from other countries during colonization and other times, that our relationship and the way these wampums were kind of taught or shared as in the story format, that that we travel in two different canoes or two different vessels, and that although we live together in these regions, that we understand that we have our own culture and our own sovereignty and our own ways of doing things and our own traditions and our own language, our own ways of caring for ourselves, our own wellness, and that we respect that that we're working with people in this time and day too, that they too have their own journey. And so you'll see that the parallel lines, that they don't cross each other, that they travel in a parallel kind of nature, and the lines continue. And so we look at that as saying that, we don't put our foot in your canoe and, you don't try to put your foot in our canoe, but we should look at that as a parallel track of whatever we attempt to accomplish. And so the same is true, should be true with the way we approach cancer care, in that prevention is the same way, screening is the same way, is that we do have our centers on the reservations, and we do work with our sovereign nations. But we also know that our people leave reservation for more care in other ways too. So whether for treatment or survivorship or palliative care, that we have to be traveling on that two-row parallel with our adjacent communities in order to have a whole view, a perspective on the cancer care continuum. So that's just one approach that we've tried to as a center, and some of the work that we do is that with the understanding that we work on territory and on reservation, but also that we also know that our people leave, and that we need to be there and work with our collaborative community members off territory as well. Next slide. And I always try to start out with sharing these stories too. And these are stories that are shared among the Haudenosaunee peoples. And I think a lot of all of our nations have some of these stories that have meaning. And it's really how you kind of look at these meanings and translate them into what we do as healthcare professionals, what we do as researchers, what we do as scientists, wherever your spectrum of what you're working on. A lot of our ancestral stories have meaning to them that we can find, I think, and use within our parallels of what we do. So this one is titled as Transparency versus Shortcuts. And our story about, and our ways that say that the creator sometimes comes down and takes a look at the things that was created, and to make sure that, you know, we as a people are abiding by and doing things that were set forward in a good way, that we respect all of our environment, that we're taking care of each other, and that we're being good people and good-minded people. And so one time the creator made one of these visits down and looked around, and he noticed that there were, you know, the trees had a song. When the wind blew, the trees made a whistle. You know, they made the sound, and if you think about it, you can hear that. And same thing when you go to the waters and you close your eyes and you listen, you can hear those waters traveling through those rocks. You can hear the rapids, you can hear the waters. There were a lot of things on Earth that were created that had a song, so to say. But at the time, he noticed that the birds didn't have a song. The birds didn't have a voice. The birds didn't have a song. And so the creator asked, he said, would you, you know, the trees have a song, and the water has song. A lot of things have song in our world here, but we would, I think it would be good if you had a song as the birds. And so the birds said, yeah, we would like that. We would like to have songs. And so they said, okay, well, what we're going to do is have a competition of sorts to see who, you know, what kind of songs you're going to earn, and what kind of songs your bird people or bird types are going to have. And so they said, and he said, the next day you come back to this area where we're meeting today, and you bring all the bird leaders, all the different birds, and I'm gonna ask you to fly towards the sun, and whoever gets the highest gets to choose what song they're gonna have. And then as you know, ranking down, you get to choose what songs. So of course everybody wanted to be the first one so they could have their first choice at a beautiful song. And so they all got prepared. Everybody was getting ready, and you know, that night everybody slept well, and they were getting ready to send their strongest bird to see who could fly the highest. And so as they were sleeping, the eagle, they were all looking at each other like, oh, you know, the eagle is a big bird. They're probably going to get towards, you know, the highest, the condor, the vulture. And then you had the little birds like the hummingbird, and all these other birds are like, well, I don't know how we're going to fare against an eagle. And so as they're getting prepared, the next morning they woke up, and there was a small bird that was sitting next to the eagle. And then the eagle has this kind of tuft around its head, and the little bird was a brown thrush, and the thrush decided to like get up in the eagle's feathers and hide in there. And so, the reason why, because he thought, well, if I get into the bird's ruffles and the eagle doesn't know that I'm there, you know, when it gets high enough, I can jump out and see if I can get higher. And so that's what happened. And so all the birds took off, you know, and they started going higher and higher. And one of the first birds to fall was the hummingbird. And the hummingbird, if you hear what it sounds like when its wings, it's you know, it's kind of it's kind of a silent song because its wings are buzzing, and it's really small. And then, you know, different birds were falling, and as, you know, they were getting higher and higher, it became some of the larger birds that were left, like the vultures and the condor, and they were getting pretty high to the sun, and they said, you know, like that's why their head is kind of scorched or red, is because, you know, they're getting pretty close to the sun, that their feathers were burned off. But ultimately, the eagle was the one that really got to the highest point above the clouds and was getting higher and higher. And just as the eagle was starting to fall, that little brown thrush rushed out of the eagle's feathers and darted higher than the eagle. So the eagle saw that, and if you hear the eagle, which also has a beautiful song, when it was falling, it kind of provided this like wind and screech song. And that's kind of the song that you get when an eagle falls and sings. It's kind of a long screech and kind of wind song. So also beautiful and powerful. And then so when the brown thrush started coming back down to earth, and all those birds were looking at it and knowing what that bird had done, the bird was happy. It was like, but then it realized that, you know, all the birds in the world were mad at it because it had taken a shortcut, so to say. It kind of cheated in a way, in that, you know, and the creator did give the first choice of a song to what they call the Bronx Rush, but it's also known as the Hermit Thrush. And if you listen to that song, and I put a link in the slide, if you listen to what the Hermit Thrush sounds like, it is a beautiful song. You hear it many places, but it was so ashamed of taking this shortcut that now it only sings, it hides all day and it sings right before dusk and dawn because it doesn't want anybody to see it, and it hides in the brush because it's still so ashamed of what it had done. So you can hear this beautiful song, but it's a very kind of hermit type isolated bird now, and that's the story behind that. And I share that because in life, and the things that we do, we have to be transparent. We have, our work, we can't take shortcuts in our work. We have to work really hard. There are no cheats in life, and the cheats in the things that we do. And this is really important with our community-based work. We have to, and I know that we all do, but sometimes, we have to step back and really think about, what the transparency is. And this is vice versa, right, too. It is a duality of being a transparent that, we as people working with outside providers want that transparency as well from the providers that we work with, the clinical settings and hospitals. In research too, we want that transparency. We don't want shortcuts, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the shortcuts that people have taken in research that have not been such a prime outcome for Indian country. So that's just kind of setting the framework of what transparency and shortcuts. Next slide. And so that leads when the transparency and the shortcuts. When the shortcuts occur and the things that are, the transparency isn't there, then you run into things like distrust and mistrust. And this happens in a lot of our settings, and you hear a lot about that. But I also say, there's always two sides to everything too. So you have your night, you also have your day. You have your medicine plants, and sometimes there's thorns on them, right? So there's a duality of a medicine plant with a thorn or something on there that's kind of dangerous. So it's always a reminder that, even though there is sometimes mistrust and distrust, it's always, you have to really kind of shape your mindset on how to get past it or work through it in a respectful way. And sometimes it's challenging. And especially when things have occurred in our history, like the smallpox, for example, and some of the early pandemics that have happened in our, we've been through this before, and you can see in the things unwrapping today with the COVID pandemic, and it's like we kind of been through this before, and so we have, it may not be contemporary history, but we understand what that is, and I think we're hyper alert sometimes, and sometimes that's part of our defense mechanism to have that resiliency and being hyper alert. And then the middle picture here is, and this has happened with a lot of communities across the US and Canada and other countries, Indigenous communities. In 1964, the United States federal government claimed eminent domain on one of our reservations in New York, where my parents or grandparents were from, and forcibly removed our family homesteads because of a dam was being built further down, and that was going to be flood part of the reservation lands. And so the U.S. Army Corps engineers in the United States forcibly removed over 200 Seneca families from our territory, and burned the houses down and came with bulldozers and relocated grave sites. And so we have that, and that was in the 1960s. So we have that, kind of contemporary historical trauma and mistrust. But as time goes on, at the same time, there are more of us that are becoming educated, that are making movements to kind of get to the other side of that and put action to the things that we're doing. And the third picture you see there is the Haudenosaunee. And maybe you have or haven't heard about some of the research that happened at Haudenosaunee in Arizona, where researchers came in and had the intentions and approval to do one type of research around diabetes, but ended up doing research on inbreeding and schizophrenia and other things for that, and challenging creation story for that tribe. So it was really, that really built a mistrust era in research between universities and tribal nations, and it's still kind of there. But again, that being said, we can't always focus and kind of get caught in the notions of pandemics or the motions of distrust that lead to the disparities. We also have to be, and sometimes it's hard and challenging, we have to be resilient. We have to have our survivorship. Our peoples have been here since the beginning of time, and we intend to be here for many generations forward. I mean, that's just who we are. We're resilient people. So you see these things, but you also have to see the other side of, why you're here on this call, and why we're learning, why we're sharing. Next slide. And those are just a couple examples, and I think if many of our communities, we see these samples of research, and it can translate to clinical practice too, but from a research perspective, you'll see an older study here done in the 60s where the state came in and was taking samples on the reservation. There wasn't really any tribal oversight or tribal review, but back in that era, there wasn't that knowledge of a relationship of nation to state, even kind of relationship. So sometimes the state would just publish stuff on Indian data. And even in the 90s, the one on the right here, where our university research team were sending surveys home from a school that was right next to the reservation, putting surveys in the kids' backpacks, and then having the kids go home, collect the data, and then come back to the school off reservation. And then they published a study, and that was without tribal review too. And so those are all the kind of unique nuances in research that, as we continue on doing research or being part of research, that is changing. We're part of, we're starting to get a bigger voice in what that means. And even I sit on a national COVID expert panel for Indigenous, the vaccine trials, to make sure that we have an Indigenous voice in the research methodology that's going on, the clinical trial education. And a lot of that stems from these earlier studies that say, hey, don't do this. Do you remember this? This is what happened, and this is the things that have occurred to bring a more of an ethical approach to do things within our sovereign nations. So in a lot of that, our recommendations back out to some of these, well, in this case, the vaccine trials, to make sure that, that the Indigenous voice is understood and heard from a nation-to-nation context. Next slide. Now here's a slide that we created that you'll see. I think is pretty. It shows a disparity, and I think it's an important disparity that I share at conferences. I share to NCI. I share to different places. But it's the map of the United States, and then you see the green shaded areas. They're kind of small, but those are the federally recognized Native nations in the U.S. And if you look at the red dots, those are all NCI comprehensive cancer centers. And so you'll see that, in the kind of the east of the US, there's quite a bit of NCI designated cancer centers right on the ocean front. And then there's a few on the kind of on the Great Lakes areas. And then there's a few on the coast in California and one here and there. But the disparity here that I'm speaking of is really in the Great Plains area, where you don't see any NCI comprehensive cancer center. And the comprehensive cancer center is what, where I work at. And you have to get that designation, you have to be kind of a 4-star at not only clinical care and surgery, but also at educational opportunities, prevention, survivorship. So there's this whole array of research and basic and prevention type research. All these things to be designated as a comprehensive cancer center to get that accreditation, but it's just not in the Great Plains. And a lot of our cancer disparities across the U.S. are in those areas of the Great Plains, and those disparities differ from tribe to tribe. And so I just wanted to put that out there, and and I continue sharing that because there needs to be something done. And and part of that is just voicing that, hey, there may be cancer care in our region, but there are hardly any NCI designated cancer centers. So one solution, the temporary one to that, is that you find where your nearest comprehensive cancer center is, and start networking and making connections and voices with them that, hey, there's a responsibility. You're the cancer center that's close to us, and we are in your so-called catchment area because you're the only one that is close to us. And and I'll speak a little bit about our center and goals too in a little while. So the next slide, kind of dwindle this down a little bit, and you look at the Indian Health Service areas. And these are kind of the service areas. When you read about Indian Health Service reports or data, they talk about different areas. And what I've always found interesting is that, it aggregates a number of tribes into one report. So, and I'll just take an example in the East, because that's where I'm at currently. And so our tribal nations are in New York. And if you'll look at New York's that state kind of on the far right, and it has a lot of those little red squares, and there's a little white blank next to it. That's Vermont. But those little red squares represent the tribes were the CHISDA areas, which are Indian Health Service areas, and those are usually where, like, the reservation is, the Indian Health Service Center, and the service area of that reservation center. So when we looked at the data here, it tells us a couple different things. That, when IHS reports in the Nashville area or the East area, they're aggregating our tribes that are ancestrally related in New York into and with, like, tribes of Florida, like the Seminoles, and the Penobscot of Maine, and the Cherokee of North Carolina. And the reports are saying that, these are all the Indian people in the Northeast, but we know as a people, and there are many tribes that are on this call too, that tribes are vastly different from each other. And so what we did to look at something that was important that we could look to help our tribes and our people as part of research, and it'll be the next slide, was to look at some of those areas. And there's even kind of a focused view of New York. And each one of those purple squares now are tribes, CHISDA areas that have Indian Health Service data in which reservations sit within New York. And all those tribes that are part of this snapshot are ancestrally related. Even though they're different parts of New York, we all practice the same religion and spirituality and culture, and languages are very similar, and we have cousins all across New York like that. And so what we did was we aggregated all these pinpointed data, and then we did analysis and a report on that, so that we could see if our data was different than that compared to the Northeast of the United States and the aggregate data of all the tribes. And then the next slide shows that, yeah, it was different. There are different disparities. We looked at mortality patterns, people dying from different things, and cancer in specific, but also looking at ways people die in our communities across the entire Confederated Nations of the Haudenosaunee. And so we did find that, differences, especially around liver disease and liver cancers and liver health disparities was one of our big findings that really wasn't in the larger Indian Health Service report. So what I'm trying to say is that it's important to really know what your data is in your own community, what your screening rate is, what your how well your prevention is going. What are the disease states in your area that you're trying to attend to, and what type of cancers. And so if they're in, and a lot of tribes and organizations have this data internally. And so it's good to work, if you are working in Indian Health Service or a center, that to really, speak to your director or your chiefs or chairman or president and find out, if is there any way you can, kind of crunch your own data. And by crunching your own data, you can really see what, some of the trends are, and you can address those trends. Otherwise, sometimes you're doing a lot of good work, but it might not be an area that needs to be focused on more. So data is important, and working, with research teams, or even just internally within the tribe. If we have an epidemiologist that does this kind of work, or a neighboring tribe, I always encourage that too, is nation to nation. We don't always have to work with the university. We don't always have to work with a non-native epidemiologist. We have some pretty good native epidemiologists and scientists that will, in our neighboring reservation or community that are doing some good work together with your partners in your region, with the other tribes, and build that. The same is true for the COVID and the pandemic. If there's a larger tribe with infrastructure, you know, if there's a tribe struggling next to you, you know, it's always good that the leadership help each other out, and especially in times of need. So that's just an encouragement, kind of in a macro perspective of helping you, you know, not just your neighbor next door to you, but your neighbor, you know, down the road too. Next slide. And then some of the work that we're doing in our center too has revolved around kind of looking at or understanding some of the genetic research that's going on, and a lot of these themes parallel some of the COVID-related research that's happening in Indian country, but across not only here in North America, but Indigenous communities across the world. And so this paper was a paper that was composed by global Indigenous scientists, and it looks at some of like the biobanking and genetic type research occurring in our communities, but it really outlines, this paper really outlines kind of the ethics of doing it and some of the nuances and the trials and tribulations. And so, you know, I'll just share a couple of those, you know, some of the, you know, with any research occurring in any country, and especially genetic research, there has to be a kind of a pathway to show benefit. And so, you know, when you're looking at research, and even in clinical, you know, what is the benefit not only to the person, but to the family and to the community? So there's all these different things that are really important. And the last point too is the international policy needs to intertwine. So we have domestic or, you know, treaties with the United States, but there are other things that we can use too, like the UN Declaration of Indigenous Human Rights. There's a lot of language in there that's really important that we can use within our communities too to support our initiatives. But these slides are going to be shared by PDF, so you can go back through these. There's a citation on most of them where these papers you can read in more detail if you have interest. Next slide. So back to pandemics a little bit, you know, I share a little bit about this, but Indigenous peoples have been impacted by a variety of diseases and epidemics over the centuries that have resulted in thousands of deaths and the extinction of some tribes. And, you know, these were, you know, we always hear the stories about, you know, Indigenous people were not previously exposed to a lot of diseases that European colonist populations had built up individual population immunities to, like smallpox and measles, that, you know, that we are going through this time, and we are, it's a challenging time. And it's hard to sometimes do our work, you know, prevention or research or clinical practice and cancer care when people are more in some communities are more in a survival mode, right? And we think about that in the way of, you know, some of the psychology thinking of, like, even Maslow had that pyramid. There was a pyramid of, like, you know, survival and you know, making sure your needs are met, and then it goes up into, like, a more emotional and mental thinking. But you can't even get to that state if, you know, and you're in a pandemic and you're looking at survival and, you know, where's your next meal going to come from? So I think we're easing our way through that kind of Maslow hierarchy of getting through something like this. But it's really in the, you know, in the resiliency of thinking and working with our neighbors and our tribes, and, you know, understanding that our resiliencies, we've been through these before, and really kind of thriving on our resiliencies and holding us as close as we can and checking in on everyone. Next slide. And so there are different types of trials and investigations too. And we look at, you know, I mentioned the COVID, but, you know, there's other trials that are occurring in our communities. And there's prevention trials that look at ways to prevent particular medical conditions or prevent them from reoccurring. That might be related to screening techniques or lifestyle changes. You have intervention trials or treatment trials to test new treatments that haven't been officially approved. Therapeutic trials to benefit participants or community members in some way, which are under treatment. Non-therapeutic ones are ones that are unlikely to produce any direct benefit to the people individually involved, but to obtain knowledge which can contribute towards the future development of new forms of treatment. And so clinical trial, it's a, I don't know if it's a controversy about, the trials now in Indian country, and it really came to light with the COVID vaccine trials. But this controversy has been there before. And what I would say about that is that it's really at the benefit of the nation to when a nation is thinking about becoming part of a research project, they have to take a lot of things into consideration. And it's not always a benefit to be part of them, but sometimes it is a benefit in a way that a lot of the treatments are created, a majority of them still today are created through investigation of these research trials, but they're normed and made for non-Indigenous people or non-Black people or non-Hispanic people. And so we know that in science, like you may get a certain type of pill or whatever it is, a vaccine, whatever it may be, that is normed or made and tested on people that are not like us or haven't been through what we've been through. And so we don't always know if those things work for our respective communities. And it doesn't have to be a vaccine, it could be a certain technique, a surgical technique. But it's hard to, and it becomes a controversy sometimes because being part of research too is, it's an unknown. And you'll see like some of the different phasing of trials too, like the phase 1 trials are really kind of a smaller trial where they're just kind of, the scientists are just trying to look at things to see if they work in a smaller population. Then it goes to phase 2 where it's a little more population and looking to see if it works among a little more of a diverse population. And the phase 3 is kind of a grander scale. So by the time phase 3 comes around, there should have been like a phase 1 and 2 that have really highlighted whether they work. But again, it's hard when you don't have a diversity in research. There's no diversity in the research. It's really hard to tell if those things really work for the population, the entire population. Next slide. And so, tribes, we always talk about research and the things that we do that need to be aware of the potential of coercion, putting the needs against treatment and testing versus research. Do the benefits outweigh the risks to a nation and citizens? And during emergency pandemic responses, tribes must be consulted, and we call it community-based participatory research. That it's a whole process. You just you don't start something new in a community without consulting and learning from the community if that is going to be appropriate. And this is not only in research, but this is in new clinical practices. This is in the screening practices. This is in prevention, survivorship, whatever it may be along the continuum of care. Is that tribes should be consulted and be part of that grant writing or development process from the get-go. And I always mention too the tribal employment rights ordinances or offices in our communities that when these programs come into our communities, we always see that like the construction, you see a good deal of natives on jobs like construction or iron working or whatever in that field, but it extends beyond that. It extends to contracts. It extends to the human service when external people come into our communities for work. That our tribal members are part of that process and have the opportunity through our rural offices. And then consideration of intellectual property and compensation, especially for Indigenous knowledge that leads to Western science and scientific advancement. And I see this sometimes, and it's kind of like interesting in a way because sometimes I see a scientist come in from some other country or state and say, "Oh, we have this new medicine, and it's in a pill, and here it is." And then the ingredients are like something that Indigenous people have been using since the beginning of time, but now it's in a bottle, and it's coined and it has some fancy name to it. So that's what I'm saying about Indigenous knowledge, and that could be in our prevention or screening too, and our techniques that we work within our communities. That we are respected and part of that process for that intellectual property of our people, and that occurs through robust data sharing agreements. With research teams or grants that come into our communities, that the data sharing agreements are there, and beyond research, that our patient and clinical staff do have data sharing agreements that are respectful to the tribe's wishes. And then again, honoring and respecting nation and nation governance. And I think a lot of tribes could use this a little more. We use it quite a bit here in the Northeast, that our treaties are, the supreme law of the land. Those are between the United States and native governments. And the sovereignty that we have in those can be interpreted in different ways, right? And so we need to include that language and thought in the way we move forward, and the things that we promoted and do in our communities, and incorporate that into all of our things if possible. Next slide. And so some of the importance of that is that indigenous populations face some of the greatest cancer health disparities and also co-occurring conditions, because we know that cancer doesn't occur in a vacuum. There's a lot of things that lead up to cancer sometimes, whether it be the change of eating, the history of diet change, the history of physical activity change, the history of the boarding school and what the things that left behind, including some of the stress traumas in families and disconnection. And so those things are part of that. But we also have, diabetes and obesity and high blood pressure and all these different things that we call co-occurring with cancer. So in order to treat that, we have to treat all of ourself, right? It's not just you're looking at one thing. We have to treat multiple things sometimes, or be aware of that. So if we're screening for one, we want to be cognizant that we're screening for other things that other people may not be aware of or screen for. For example, cancer screening in an off-reservation area may not know about the prevalence of diabetes in our communities. So, that's something that we can go out and teach our non-Native brothers and sisters about, some of those disparities that they too should be screening for. And within your centers that you work now in your practices for screening, that, you're also screening or cognizant or aware of other things that you should be screening that are relevant to your population. And that, and that's all that is important to know. And in the research, be aware of the research that's occurring in your community, and that shouldn't be just done for the Western scientists. That should be done with the benefit for our communities, and how that research is translated into the clinical practice that you're using. Because there are findings, and if there's at least one piece of that project research that is applicable to your work, then maybe you should, that should be a conversation to have, how it can apply and sustain if it makes sense. And tribal approval is one thing that we talk about in research a lot too. That the tribes, again, the CBPR process, that we're all engaged from the start of whatever it may be, and to the end and beyond, into the dissemination. Next step, or next slide. And so I'll go into a little bit about post-pandemic research and what prevention research is needed going forward related to Indigenous people. And so right now we are facing this challenge, right? It's this pandemic time. It's our jobs are challenging. Our jobs are becoming virtual, and it's really hard sometimes. And so we have to think ahead too. What does that mean, in 2 years, 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, and beyond? And so, that is, we're in the field of cancer, but we also have to be aware that in our communities now, there's an increase of substance use. There's likely an increase of different eating patterns, whether it's healthy or not eating. There's an increase of tobacco use and likely a lot of mental health concerns. So, as in the cancer field, yeah, but also, during the time of the pandemic, we need to be thinking about what's going to happen and what we need to be aware of and train for as we move forward. So, those are all important features of building some of these things together for our what's going on now and perhaps our next decade of existence. And then you can go to the next one. And so that's translational science. How do communities translate these findings into ideas of real world sustainable practice? How do we take this from the regional levels to inform national or global or back to our communities? Kind of a circular process, and that we, you know, the things that we're learning and sharing, that it's action oriented and also sustainable. We need to think about sustainability when we do our work, because we can't depend on one thing or another. That we have to really think about sustainability of way things move forward, and to be transparent. Don't take shortcuts. You know, sometimes it's, you know, you may see something that looks easy, like a drive-through food window, right? I mean, we all done it. You know, like, oh man, and it was cook a meal in half an hour, 45 minutes, or can I have that chicken sandwich right now? So, you know, that's a shortcut some of us take sometimes, but we have to be cognizant of those shortcuts, and the practice that we do too is that, you know, sometimes it does take a little longer, but we want to be thorough. Next slide. And so our center that we've created kind of follows along that line of, you know, we started a center here at Roswell Park called the Center for Indigenous Cancer Research. And the mission statement was created with our community members. And what they said, this is what we want in the center. This is how we want the center to address in what you hope to do. To honor the values of Indigenous knowledge, sovereignty, and respect for the environment through community-driven partnerships, collaborative research, education to reduce the cancer on Indigenous communities regionally, nationally, and internationally. With the goals being research led by community input, like health promotions or environmental science or basic science, that it includes a cancer care continuum from prevention to end of life, and that there's different ways of outreach, and that's what we've been trying to do through podcasts, virtual grand rounds, which we have quite often that are open to anyone, our newsletter and social media, and then to change policy, you know, to make these nation-to-nation to cancer center agreements so that, you know, it isn't just a good idea, that it's put into policy. And of course, a pillar of our center and the things that we do too is education, is that there can't be just a few cancer scientists or a few cancer practitioners. That we really have to think ahead and engage our youth and students into the education piece of cancer along the whole continuum. So this whole thing, even though it has the title of cancer research, research is part of it, but it's really a collective of all these things that we hope to accomplish. And we put in there regionally, nationally, and internationally, because, you know, we are a cancer center in New York, but we work all across the country. With example today, you know, it's a great partners that we have here, and that we share what we're doing, and we share how we can assist maybe in your communities, and vice versa, that the things that you have done in your communities that are successful, that we would like to learn, that we can share with our communities too. So it's kind of that duality of learning between intertribal learning is important, and your experiences with the Turo, you know, working with your non-Indigenous partnerships off reservation, and what successes have you had there. And so that's the thing, you know, we want to put together in our center that we've had since January, that we're kind of growing up in putting these things forward. We have a lot of opportunities in internship programs for our youth. So if there are any youth that are interested in cancer type work, and especially in the research and STEM area, there's internship opportunities for Native youth. And then the research, even, you know, if there's research ideas and you need a partner in cancer research, you know, we are open to collaborations, and or we're open to linking you to other cancer centers in your region that we have affiliations with, to engage them to work with you at a macro level. So that's what we're about, is working together in a good way. Next slide. And so this is kind of the end of what I'm going to share here is, you know, the shaping health for our future generation is really the health of people. So when you're able to shape the health of one person, like this young lady here is my youngest daughter. And if you're able to shape the health of this one person, and then that one person brings it back to the family, and you're able to help shape the health of a family, and then you're able to help shape and understand and provide multiple healthy families, then you're starting to create a healthy community. And through that translatable discussion and knowledge and the dissemination of resiliency themes and sustainable research, we prepare for our 7th generation. And Haudenosaunee ways of thinking is that we don't think about what we're doing today and what that means. We don't even think about our family. We don't even think about the current generation. We do, but what we're really thinking about is what we're doing 7 generations forward. Is that the research that we're doing now, the people that we're helping now, the prevention and screening that we're doing now, is really thinking 7 generations forward. And if we have that concept of thinking beyond just 1 or 2 generations, and that's how you survive as an Indigenous people. And we have done that. That's part of who we are. We've had the first points of contact with colonization, and we're still here strong. And part of that was part of that 7th generation philosophy and the philosophy of the good mind. When we work for peaceful health, that we develop a strength which encourages a good mind and a resilient way of thinking. So that ties in all these different things. You know, the 7th generation thinking and the shaping of future generations is really our stance, and something that we share, and I share with you, that, you know, it's really kind of the pillar of what we do in life, in our work, in our communities. And the last slide, I probably won't have, I was going to share another story here. Well, here's another one, the cultural resistance and being Indigenous, and that every breath we inhale is resistance and every exhale is survivorship. And I learned this during a presentation by a gentleman named Harlan Pruden. It was pretty interesting that, you know, that means a lot. Every study, you know, and I translate it, so every study we envision, every investigation we do, every research project we put into action with and for our communities is resiliency. And I think that's about my time. I was going to share a story about one of our great ball games, lacrosse, but perhaps I'll get an invitation back sometime, and I can start with that one where I left off here. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to address them. The PDFs are available, and my contact information is there if you would like to reach out at some point. Nyawe.
Thank you so much for that, Rodney, for sharing your information around the cancer continuum. And also, one thing that I do like is how you're able to interconnect those types of things with stories, because, you know, as Indigenous people, we relate a lot of our teachings and the way we conduct ourselves through these stories. So I think that that's pretty important and powerful across Indigenous countries. Thank you. And at this time, I will open it up to questions. So how we will do this is Tinka Duran will unmute your microphone, but at the same time, you're going to have to go into where you see your microphone and unmute yourself. So at this time, we'll go ahead and open it up. And if you have a question, go ahead and unmute your microphone. And also, if you would like, you can type your question into the question box and we'll answer them as they come in.
This is Tinka. I have a question, Rodney. In terms of clinical trials, it seems like we see low participation rate from our American Indians, from our tribal community members. Do you think that's from, well, it probably is multiple levels of low participation due to, like, they're not hearing about them, or they're not available, or people are concerned about clinical trials? Can you talk a little bit about that, and if you see American Indian participation increasing at all?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And that's a historic question, and it's not just natives, right? It's like Blacks and Hispanic people and other minorities, LGBTQ, Two-Spirit, people with disabilities, elderly. So it's a lot of different type of minority communities. What I think in Indian country, one is right. You're right. It's not. If you think about it, do you know of any clinical trials that are available right now? And you may know one or two, but it just isn't marketed for Indian country. and that, you know, maybe it isn't intended that way, or it just doesn't happen that way. And I think a lot of it too is because, especially in the Great Plains, where you would have clinical trials, there are no cancer centers, right? For cancer trials anyways. But if there are universities, they may not have Indigenous scientists or researchers that are doing that type of work. So it's really unknown how to go about it, or sometimes they're afraid to. And so, you know, the education is important too. I think people are hesitant sometimes because they're not aware, or they don't have the information that's indigenized, so to say, to understand what clinical trial is. I read some of those clinical trial recruitment things. I'm like, wow, where the consent forms? It's like, geez, it's like, it's pretty intense. And so it can be scary too. And so the education is a part of it. Another part of it too is I think a lot of tribes don't have a research infrastructure of review. And so some of the larger tribes may have a research review board or institutional review board for research, an ethics review, but many tribes don't. And so that's where I think, like, if there is an interest in some tribal areas, to partner with a native tribe that's in the region that may have a native IRB or tribal IRB, to learn or have them review research that your nation's interested in it. And it always has to be approved by a council resolution or by the chiefs, you know, whatever system that, so I think those are some of the key areas. This one is not marketed or outreach, but it's certainly probably not indigenized, where it's for the people to understand. Two is that there's no connection between the university or cancer center and they probably want to, but they just don't know how to go about it. So sometimes it's kind of fearful in a way for both the community and for the scientists. And then you know, all these other, the three is the mistrusts that have occurred, and so people just like, yeah, I'm gonna do that. And so I think it's a triad of different, or a number of different things. But on the flip side, you know, we're at a time now where we are understanding it a little more. I think we are, if the tribe feels that the benefit for the people, then it reviews it with what I was calling a two-eyed seeing in the beginning, is with an indigenous lens and then a Western lens, and how do those two intertwine with each other to get a perspective that's, you know, a Western science, but an indigenous science. And that's what I was trying to talk about today. And Eugene was mentioning this, like, how do we understand different things? And a lot of it's through our stories and our tellings. What does that mean to Western science, and vice versa? What does Western science mean to us? And so those clinical trials, important for Indian country. It can be a benefit for Indian country, but it has to be done in the right way. It has to be by the guidance of the people.
Thank you for
Thank
that.
you.
We also have a question in the question box from Melinda Balderas. Is there any plans for tribal or IHS or urban area facilities in the Great Plains area looking at a possible comprehensive cancer centers? And this sounds like it might be open to everyone who may know.
You know, I would have to look into that a little further, but I know the University of North Dakota has Dr. Don Moore, who may not be in the cancer center itself, but has a good relationship in the cancer field. And there's a whole Indigenous program at UND. And so that's a good connection to have, you know. And then I would look around, even at the universities that have cancer departments that are doing research. They may not be a cancer center, like an NCI, National Cancer Institute designated center, but there are a lot of community universities that have a good collaboration or a good relationship with some of the tribes, or may not. But within that, you know, look for the cancer departments and see if there's anything that has interest, and talk to your health director, talk to your chiefs and leadership to see if there's anything of interest to you know, if there's any collaborative moving forward. And that's what I do here too, you know, beyond our Haudenosaunee, with other tribes. And you know, I think that's, you know, keeping an open mind to working is always a good thing to move forward.
This is Tinka. As well, it's not I don't believe it's an NCI cancer center, but there's the Nebraska Medicine Fred and Pamela Buffett Cancer Center. And I know there's been some efforts from the tribes in Nebraska. That's in Omaha, Nebraska, by the way. And I know there's been some efforts by the tribes and the urban populations in Nebraska to work with that cancer center. It's fairly new. To include American Indian or Indigenous Natives input into that and how they can partner and better collaborate together. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, if there are no other questions, once again, I want to thank you, Rodney, for joining us in our Great Plains Partners and Cancer Screening Conference for 2020. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah.
At this time, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our next presenter, who is Ray O'Leary. In a bit, Ray, I'm going to give you the controls, but as of now, I'll go ahead and introduce you. So Ray O'Leary serves as a public health analyst for Missouri Breaks Research in Eagle Butte, South Dakota. She is the founder of the Chunli Tobacco Coalition in Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe and will be presenting on the Tribal Toolkit developed to promote tobacco education and policy. So at this time, I'll go ahead and turn the controls over to you, Ray. And if you can unmute your, oh, there you are. Perfect.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Good deal, and you can see my screen?
Yes.
Very good. I'm just seeing the very bottom portion of my screen. I wonder if that's it sitting on my end here, but I guess if you guys can see the full screen, that's what's most important, so.
Yep, we could see everything.
Okay, good deal. Well, thank you for the introduction, Eugene, and for the invitation to present today. I, like you said, work with the Chunli Coalition, and we had some pretty exciting success a few years ago to get our tribe smoke-free. And since then, we've had multiple requests from other tribes asking us to, how can we do this for ourselves? What can we learn from your experience? So from that, we developed a toolkit, which is now a web page, and I'm going to be reviewing that. I also have to say I am juggling, like many people probably on this call and across America, working from home and managing my 4 young children. So I have them all bribed with screen time right now. So hopefully we don't have any interruptions, but bear with me if we do. And yeah, so as far as, cancer screening goes, obviously there's a lot of connections between cancer and tobacco. But what I want to point out is that this toolkit is intended to be kind of a universal tool. It's in the context of tobacco, but actually right now somebody's using it for advocating for new COVID precautions. There's all kinds of applications where you can just take the lessons and the topics and apply them to whatever line of work that you're in. So with that, all right, so kind of a history of the Chunli Coalition. Chunli is the Lakota word for tobacco, and we began in 2009 when the state of South Dakota passed or began working on the smoking ban for the state. But of course, due to tribal sovereignty, that didn't apply on any of the 9 reservations in the state of South Dakota. At that point, myself and about 9 others gathered just to, have a very first meeting on discussing what we wanted for our reservation, and we all agreed that we wanted smoke-free air in indoor public places. So we reached out to the Public Health Law Center, who provided assistance to help us kind of develop and draft the ordinance and discuss, what we wanted included in that. How do we make it culturally relevant to our population? And after, you can see that bottom bullet, a lot of coalition meetings, a lot of membership recruiting in our community here, education that was kind of continuous throughout that time frame, media efforts, which involved contests and campaigns and everything else, as well as legal reviews of our ordinance from the tribal attorney, and multiple presentations to our Tribal Health Committee, we were successful at getting the ordinance passed. It's now CRST Ordinance 77, and that took effect in 2015. So this is kind of a timeline to just have an overview of all the work that that happened between the time the coalition began and where we're at more recently. And you can see in the gold color there at the bottom, that was the big ordinance that we were wanting, but because we had a lot of roadblocks along the way and challenges, and obviously, you know, taking smoking away from people in indoor public places is a pretty big deal when about half of your adult population smokes. So it's a more controversial topic, but you can see kind of the momentum that was gained up to that point in May 2015 with other smaller policies that we focused on and kind of diverted our attention until the tribe seemed to be ready for this. We worked on smoke-free parks, motel policies, the city council banning the selling of commercial tobacco at our cultural center, and then modifications to the IHS policy. Then, of course, all of those kind of helped us build that momentum to the big policy we wanted in May 2015. And that momentum continued to grow with other tobacco-related policies in the years following. And this is just kind of a demonstration of, you know, if you're doing policy work, it takes a lot. It takes sometimes years, especially if it's a controversial or a pretty big policy. But there are smaller policies that can be worked on in the meantime to build that momentum. This here is just kind of a brief overview of what we did to develop the toolkit and the framework that I'll be presenting on. We took all of the grants that we'd received between the years 2011 and 2018 and kind of tried to quantify all the different activities that we did with those through a coding process. And we kind of saw a trend of 3 different areas that all of our activities fit in, and that's education, community engagement, and policy. So then we assigned all the coded initiatives to each of those categories, and you can kind of see the progression of momentum that was gained over the years. 2015, of course, being the culminating time when the policy was passed, and how most of the momentum has been retained since then. So first, kind of to back up a step and look at the Toolkit Foundation, a portion of our funding comes from the State Department of Health Tobacco Control Program, and they have a really awesome website, findyourpowersd.com, that they just revamped, and it has wonderful information on the use of traditional tobacco and how commercial tobacco can be interconnected to that. And then also some resources for communities to combat the tobacco problems that they see in their community. And when I say tobacco problems, I'm referring specifically to commercial tobacco, not the use of our traditional chinchasha plant. So when this was launched and we were kind of at a point where we were ready to make our toolkit more public, we just started a partnership with the state's Find Your Power campaign, and they allowed us to embed our toolkit within this website. So kind of just a overview of the framework. So as I said before in that chart, there was 3 components to all the activities that the Chunley Coalition did. The first being education, the second being community engagement, and the third being policy. And we saw this shape kind of form. I guess everyone has different ways of thinking, but I personally think in shapes when I am trying to like conceptualize an idea. This is what came to mind of 2 overlapping circles. All of these 3 pieces have a very important role. Anytime you're doing public work, especially when it's around health. But it's really critical to point out that education has to involve community engagement and policy has to involve community engagement. So that's kind of why community engagement is at the core of this cycle. The other thing to point out is the arrows. So there may be a time when, depending on where your community is at or what the readiness is of your decision makers, that you may only just focus on education and community engagement. There might be other times when the timing is right and it's time to switch gears into policy. And there might be just a nice even balance of the education, policy, and community engagement at any time. But it's important to note there's no beginning to this process. There's no end to this process. It's ongoing, and you can start anywhere that it seems appropriate for your community and for the capacity that you currently have. The other big piece of this is the cultural lifeways. You can see at the bottom left and the top right. So many of our activities we found were made more successful by embedding cultural lifeways into them. So you'll see some examples in the framework and the toolkit that display how that was done. So this here is just kind of a purpose statement for the toolkit. So the purpose of the Tribal Tobacco Advocacy Toolkit is to support tribes and tribal advocates and anybody working with American Indian populations. And as I said before, this is intended to be customized. It's intended to generate ideas and connect you to resources that might be available to you in whatever the public health area that you work in. The overall goal is to reduce the health inequities of Native people for today's generation and for the 7 generations to come. So at this time, we will switch over to the actual toolkit, and I'm going to hopefully make this a little bit interactive. And what I'd like to do is just kind of we won't have time to go through the entire toolkit because it's pretty massive, but my hope is that we can explore a little bit in the actual website and get all of you familiar with how to kind of navigate the toolkit. So just bear with me as I switch screens here. All right, are you guys able to see the web page now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So this is the Find Your Power SD website, and I want everybody to take a pen and a paper and just write this URL down. It's just findyourpowersd.com. And as I said before, this has incredible information that's available to anybody on the tradition. So you can see this has a sacred chinchasha, a sacred pipe section, Find Your Power medicine wheel, and a section on exploitation and targeting of American Indian populations. Also in the Our People tab, there's the health effects of commercial tobacco, pregnancy and nicotine use, and e-cigarettes, vape, and Juul. And then some information on the quit resources for South Dakota residents. And if you're not South Dakota, located in South Dakota, every state in the nation has a quit line, and just explore whatever the options are in your state, and promoting them is wonderful as far as cancer prevention goes. And then the Connect has just other resources, links to tribal offices in the state, and information to contact. So wonderful resource. I'd encourage everybody to take some time to explore in here. But for now, the other big point is this Tribal Tobacco Advocacy Toolkit tab along the top. And what we're going to do, I kind of went through the purpose and how to use the framework. I want to point out that there's this print the toolkit option. I personally like to have the option of highlighting and dog-earing certain pages. So if you're somebody like that, you do have the option to use that button to print the toolkit in its entirety. But for now, if you are interested in kind of the process and the history of the Chunli Coalition, you can explore this tab here, which will link you out to a document that we put together on the history, kind of a little bit of what I just shared, some video links that might be useful to kind of get an idea of the coalition's work, and then a more detailed methods and results that we did for developing the toolkit timeline and some references for all that information. Also, another important button here is the resources and partners. And you'll see here we have it organized by national resources and partners that we have partnered with and utilized in the past. The National Native Network, Keep It Sacred, is a fabulous one. Really, anything on here is fabulous. We wouldn't have listed it if it wasn't a great resource. And then, of course, the state and regional resources and partners with anything that's blue within the toolkit is clickable, so it will take you to each of those individual pages. And then some ideas of if you are focusing in public health policy or education or tobacco specifically, maybe some ideas of where to start and who to reach out to kind of build your network of people. And these are some examples of who we've used and agencies and departments that make up our Chunley Coalition membership. And then at the bottom here, just a couple ideas on national tobacco events that reoccur every year. So we'll go back again past the introduction section. And as you can see, if you remember, there's the education circle, the community engagement overlapping in the middle, and the policy on the right. So what I'd like to do is just kind of ask if someone can monitor the question box, or if anyone's interested in unmuting. What I'd like to do is just explore one of these a little bit more in depth. So if you can just call out or type in the chat box one of these blue texts that you would like to explore as a group together.
Sure. And like Ray said, I'll have the question box out if anyone would want to pick a tab, or as of now, I can unmute everyone so that they can voice their. Okay. So for those that want to ask, you can go ahead and click your microphone and unmute yourself, or type in the box.
And right now we'll just focus on community engagement, and we'll do the same option to have folks self-select what they'd like to explore for the education and policy sections as well. But for now, let's just focus on one of the blue text lines in the community engagement section of the toolkit.
Awesome.
Don't be shy.
Once again, for those that don't know, you have a microphone next to your name and you're able to click it and unmute yourself, or you can type in the question box and we will be able to read it off from there. And again, this is in regards to the community engagement section on findyourpowersd.com, which is shared on the screen.
Well, if nobody else is going to ask, this is Tinka. I want to ask, can you click on the grassroots movement? It just seems like coalition building can be hard for people to do. I just know that, you know, it can be difficult to coalition build. So I'd like to look at that.
And then,
Thank you, Tinka.
and then after that, you have one. It's find state or national data.
Okay, thank you. All right, so first I'll just kind of do a quick overview of the layout of each of these sections. So anytime you click on the blue text within that homepage, you'll get directed to this page. All of them are structured very similar. They have kind of an introduction statement. They have this image to show you which section of the framework that you're in. Then there's planning, action, and resources, kind of a what if section and hints, and some specific examples from the Chunley Coalition. So that's the overview and structure that you'll see on every one of those blue sections that you're gonna click on and explore on your own after this meeting is over. So for grassroots movements specifically, we'll dig in a little bit deeper on this one. Grassroots movements engage ordinary people to work together to create change. So this wouldn't necessarily need to be an official coalition, although that's a wonderful direction to head towards. But if there's something that you want to do in your community, maybe it's increase the breast cancer screening in your tribal community, and asking yourself, what can we do locally to kind of band together to make the change that we want to see, which is the increase in breast cancer screening. This can be applied, like I said, to any topic area, but working from the grassroots. So it's kind of this idea that the grass is the foundation of it. It's not a top-down approach where we're going to say, like, who's the big funder or the tribal leader that has the power to do something on this. It's saying, what can we as just ordinary people on the ground do to create movement in the right direction that we want to go. So the planning steps here is to first find that devoted leader. Sometimes that's more than one, to organize a coalition. Like I said, that wouldn't necessarily be required, but it is a great step to kind of get a coordinated effort of folks coming to the table on a regular basis to make sure that you're headed in the direction that you want to go. The second planning step is defining the goal and objective of the coalition. So kind of sitting down as a group and putting pen to paper to figure out what do we want from this. So in our case of the Chunley Coalition, our goal was to make the reservation smoke-free in all indoor public places. But in the example of breast cancer screening promotion, that could be, the goal would be to, increase the people that get their mammograms every year. And then objectives could be a little bit more pointed. So for the coalition, working towards that goal of smoke-free air, the objectives could be like advocating to tribal leaders, getting the word out to the community on the issue and why it's important. For breast cancer screening, that could be more pointed to, connecting the resources in the community to the actual people of the community. So kind of breaking that goal down of how are we going to get there. The third planning step is discussing and learning why each member is at the table. And you'll find this is a really fun activity for grassroots movements and coalitions to just find how unique everyone's story is. Some people might say, my grandpa passed away from lung cancer, and another one might say, I grew up in a household that was full of smoke and it always made me feel sick. But to just really explore what brings people to the table. And then asking, where that passion is driven from, of course. The fourth planning step is identifying reasonable expectations for members. And these can change over time, but just very clearly defining, how often do we plan to get together? Are there, 5 big events every year or 1 big event and then we're done? And what level of participation do you need from the volunteers who are stepping forward to be involved in the grassroots movement, I guess. And then step 5 is recruiting those additional members. So usually these first 4 steps happen with kind of a more smaller core group of people, but then identifying like who's missing from the table and who else can we get to join our group. So I just want to point out right here that throughout the toolkit, you'll see blue hyperlinks, and some of them take you to other places in the toolkit that are related or connected. Others might take you to an outside link. And then the third category of hyperlinks would be taking you to a specific resource of the Chunley Coalition. So this one is a different section of the toolkit. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on that and demonstrate how the grassroots movements and coalition recruitment are connected and kind of a process to make that connection. So I'll just go back. We won't go into that one in depth for now. Action items, start with whatever you have. Even if it doesn't seem like much, you just got to get started. With a little bit of passion and commitment, the movement can really take shape and go wherever you want it to go. One resource and video that I enjoy is on Standing Rock's resistant encampment and kind of the grassroots movement that developed that. And this what if, this is kind of lessons from the Chunley Coalition of, how if something happens, kind of how to troubleshoot that. And if you can't find a leader, be the leader. If members disagree on the goal or the direction or the objectives, have a vote is a tip. And then hints would be anything that we've maybe learned over the years. Sorry, I have a little one trying to break in. Hints are anything that we, think as we were putting all the information together for this toolkit, asking ourselves, like, what do we wish we had known in the beginning? So one tip that we found in the grassroots movement is for us, what worked well is to avoid that hierarchical structure with like a president, secretary, et cetera, and just kind of keeping everybody on an equal playing ground was really helpful for the Chunley Coalition. But again, just find what works for you. And of course, allowing everyone's opinions to be heard, making sure that you're giving the quiet ones in the room ample opportunities to contribute their ideas. So for the Chunley Coalition, the big goal is reduce the tobacco disparity of CRST, and then you can see how you'll achieve that goal and the 4 objectives that our Chunley Coalition came up with. A couple of photos here of different things that we've done, and that's the end of this section. So we'll go back to that home page and trying to remember, was it finding state or national data, the other one that?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, perfect. I might breeze through this one a little bit quicker since we already did one more in depth in community engagement, but finding state and national data is important if you're not able to get local data. Of course, local data is always the best option, but that's not always feasible if you don't have the capacity or the time to collect your own data or find out what already exists. But there are plenty of other options at a state and national level. Also, the Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board is another great resource and their epicenter to find data for your tribe. But if that's not an option, it's kind of some planning steps of first pinpointing what data is needed, doing a search for what organizations are related to that topic of interest and seeing if there's something in those areas that might meet your needs. Doing a search for data from the organizations. So within the population of interest, which probably for most on the call would be within the Native American population, identifying the questions that are most meaningful to support your goal that we talked about in the last slide, and then compiling those results into a meaningful way. And this is another link that's going to take you to the other section of sharing those results in a meaningful way. Resources, a couple links that you can explore for South Dakota CDC and the Office of Surgeon General, all related to tobacco. Some follow-up what if and hints for you all, and kind of an example of one way the Chunley Coalition took national data. This came from the 50-year anniversary of the Surgeon General first announcing that secondhand smoke was dangerous, and they did a report on kind of where we went in those 50 years. And in that, we saw this really cool graphic, but also sad, I should say, that one child out of every 13 alive in the US today will die if we don't make a change, essentially, in the current state of tobacco. So what we did is took that national statistic and applied it to our very high 51% smoking rate to get the calculation that in our area, 1 in 6 children would die from smoking. And we made a graphic that we distributed throughout our community. So kind of an example of a way to use national data and apply it to your own population. All right, so very quickly here, I know I'm a little bit short on time, but let's explore one blue clickable link in education, if somebody can call that out or use the questions box. And again, while we're waiting here, keeping in mind that education should overlap with the community engagement. So you'll see some overlap there, but it's very important to do that at a community-wide level and also maybe narrowing in on certain groups such as like the schools or others.
Okay, looks like we got another one, walk-in talks. Sure,
that's one of my favorites. So walk-in talks was an idea that started quite a while ago for the Chunley Coalition. And what we did, there's a lot of, I'm not sure if this is a strand of a specific thing or regional or maybe national trend in tribal communities, but it's common to see groups, advocacy groups, remembrance groups organize a walk through town. And we took that just a little bit further. We did a walk and then had a talk at the end of it on tobacco. And each year there would be kind of a different theme that we focused on. We always have a drum group who leads our walk. And this is just kind of a way to get a lot of publicity and kind of a way to get more presence, I guess, in your community with whatever your issue is. So you can see the planning steps here is kind of setting the logistics, basically, the date, time, where you're going to go, who's going to talk, what the route looks like. The getting police escort is really important just for safety purposes during the walk. Step 4 is coordinating the leaders. So thinking through who's going to be the drum group that you use. Do you have all the resources that you need? Do you have somebody to say a prayer beforehand? All those coordinating pieces. Then step 5 is handing out flyers with the facts. Promoting the walk and talk, of course, getting the word out about it in multiple venues, and inviting news reporters to cover the event. If nobody shows up, just do it yourself. Submit an article. We learned that too. The day of the event, do a registration table so you can keep an eye on how many people participate. and designate a person to do photography for the event. So you have some documentation. That's a wonderful way to get the word spread even further after the walk's over. And then again, following the event, if no reporters show up, just submit that press release and photos to your local newspaper. Some ideas on materials needed. I won't go into depth on those, but you can look back at those on your own time if you'd like. Some hints. Tribes sometimes offer administrative leave. We found this with our tribe, so it's a process, but eventually, I mean, you can get any tribal workers to be allowed to participate in the walk on the clock, essentially. And that's something that's really helped with our participation. We found that having an open mic for participants to share their reason for caring about the issue or participating gets some really powerful stories shared, some that we would have never heard had we not given that opportunity. And then we've also had our drum group do honor songs and different things like that, but also making sure that we honor the drum group in a good way. So you can see another example here is how we included the cultural lifeways and some photos of one of the walks and talks that we did. This photo here is a photo of honoring everyone who participated who had successfully quit using tobacco, who got their handshake and a special song from the drum group. Okay, and then the last section also, you'll see a quick 5-minute video. It's not just of me, but of entire coalition and volunteers who stepped up that kind of tells the overall story of the Chunli Coalition. So you can check back for that at your leisure. But for now, last section is policy. So if anybody wants to call out one of the blue texts that they'd like to explore.
Again, everyone, this is the policy section, which is everything that's highlighted in blue.
Eugene, do you want to pick one if there's none that have turned up yet?
Yes, I was just going to ask, celebrating publicly.
All right, that's a good one too. So you kind of see in this section, the different components are in policy. It's there's a little bit more of an order than the other sections. So in policy, at first you would engage the stakeholders. Next would be to draft and revise the policy. The third would be presenting that policy before your decision makers. And then if and when it is passed, then the fourth step is implementing and defending that policy. So celebrating publicly is very important because after the policy passes, you have to celebrate so everybody knows the good work that happened, and it's kind of a way to take an upbeat, more positive spin on the policy, especially if it's one that's a little bit more controversial. And like it says here, it keeps the narrative positive and can help overshadow any negativity or backlash. So planning, pitch your story to the press. There's some really in-depth ways of doing this, or pretty basic, but like I said, just writing that press release on your own can be helpful. Giving your volunteers some talking points. So if people do come up to them and say, oh, I heard that you were involved in this, they have something prepared or something that they've already been able to review to say, yep, this is why I supported it, and this is why it's important. Identifying those supporters willing to be interviewed or get quotes or statements for them for your press release can be really valuable. If that doesn't happen, news reporters tend to just pick random people off the street and get their interview. And that's okay too, because sometimes you get some really great responses, but identifying those individuals ahead of time is a way to have a little bit more control over the message that gets out about whatever the policy is you're celebrating. Then gauging your research, so making sure that you take time to assess if there's other news stories or news companies that picked it up and shared the story. Monitoring the internet for media outlets that pick up the story. Sorry, I just covered that one. And then notifying the specific groups impacted by the policy. So making sure that there's a memo or a statement or a sign or something that can go out to the places that are impacted to make sure that they are aware that the change is happening and when it's happening. You can see here, I just want to click on this housing tenants one. Like I said, it wasn't just the reservation-wide indoor smoke-free policy that was passed. We did a lot of other small ones. So this is an example of one of the resources that's specific to the Chunli Coalition that can be modified for your purposes. So in this one, this is when one of the apartment complexes made a smoke-free housing policy, we helped them to draft a letter to write to the tenants. So just kind of a short and sweet example that you can kind of build from. And then the third step in planning is notifying the general public. And again, each of these takes you to other sections of the toolkit, but making sure that it's a multimedia approach, not just newspaper, or you're going to get different demographics depending on which media source you use. Some resources, Haudenosaunee has an amazing video on making their tribal casino smoke-free that was really celebratory in nature. Hiring a campaign manager, we did that for a very brief time after our policy passed to have some help because we really didn't know what we were doing for the first time. And Haymakers is the company that we used. What if no media outlet picks up your story? Again, interview your supporters and make your own video, newspaper article, social media posts, any of that to get the story told on your own. What if you get negative press about your policy? First, the tip we learned is to not engage with the cynics and counter it with as much positive press as possible. Generally, we think that people are mostly positive, and you just have to be the louder voice than the naysayers sometimes. Here is a little party that our coalition members threw kind of for ourselves. We ordered a cake and had a big celebration for a meeting after the ordinance was passed. That was a pretty special day for all of us. And then another example here, this picture shows celebrating future leaders who spoke up about the importance of smoke-free air in enclosed public places. So this is a way to kind of take the negativity off of taking smoking away from the bingo hall and saying, wow, like these are all the kids that wanted this and that spoke up to their tribal leaders and who were instrumental in getting this policy passed. So that is the celebrating publicly section. And I think just for logistics sake, I'll avoid going back to the presentation. The last slide was just on my contact information. And I know that my slides have been uploaded in the handouts tab. So if you're interested in reaching out, please do so. If you saw something in the toolkit that you want to maybe explore a little bit more, please bookmark this page and revisit it and share it with anybody else who you think might benefit from it. But with that, I'd like to thank everyone for inviting me and for your attention.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Ray, and all of the amazing work that you've done with the Eagle Butte Reservation. Since I've been on the health board, your name came up quite a bit, especially whenever the policy was passed. So, you know, being able to see all the, you know, behind the scenes and all the work being put into that, you know, it's amazing work. So I want to thank you. And at this time, we'll go ahead and open this up to questions. So for those that have a question for Ray, go ahead and type it in the question box and we will read them off as they come. We do have one that I'm not sure if it's a question, but it might be a comment from Melinda Balderas. So it's so hard to influence the casino to understand the risk they put the employees at.
Yes, absolutely, Melinda. There's quite a big movement right now going on in the context of COVID. So many casinos were shut down during the pandemic, and the movement has been for casinos to reopen smoke-free because of the additional risk that smoking and secondhand smoke exposure puts on individuals who come down with COVID. There's been some great work done by American Non-Smokers' Rights Foundation. If you look at the resources tab on the framework, you can find their website, as well as Keep It Sacred has done some webinars and trainings and discussions around that. So thank you for your comment. And if you are involved in that advocacy work, I commend you. And you know, I think just reach out to those who are also working in that area, because it can feel very isolating doing unpopular work like public health policy, but there are some wonderful people out there that can support you with that.
Thank you. And if anyone has any more questions, go ahead and type them into the chat. And also just keep in mind that the presentations are available in the handouts, and I'm pretty sure Ray would be more than willing to give you access to that toolkit. Also, we do have another, I'm not sure if it's a question, it might be a comment, but let me see here. Amen on casinos. There are several in the northern parts of Kansas, and we stopped into one thinking no smoking would be going on because of the pandemic, but we were wrong. It was rough, but I will be back. Anybody looking for to make the casino smoke free? Thank you, Aaron Sweezy.
Yeah, as I'm not aware specifically of efforts with that specific casino, but one tip that I would have is anytime you go to a casino that has smoking, use the comment cards. They actually have quite a bit of power. So if enough people are dropping the same comment over and over, regardless of if that's we want chicken on the buffet or we don't want smoking in the casino, those speak loudly to the people that are making the decisions, calling the shots for that casino. So make sure you take the time to use those comment cards.
This is Tinka, and I have a question. You know, in terms of your toolkit, there's a lot of resources from a lot of different organizations, National Native Network, just different ones. Have you guys, you know, and you've done such amazing work for the South Dakota in terms of the tribal casinos. Have you guys thought about expanding out to like the Great Plains region and working with other tribes to, you know, create more smoke-free areas and casinos and that type of stuff at all? Have you had any thought about that type of expansion?
Yeah, we definitely, I mean, that's the goal. We don't want to just sit on this little golden nugget that we were able to achieve and keep it for ourselves. We absolutely want to support any other tribes that are working in this area of tobacco policy and supporting them to be successful and using our toolkit and whatever resources are there to make the path quicker and easier than it was for us. You know, for us, it took 6 years, and it was an intense 6 years, but it can be done. And, you know, using these resources here hopefully can speed that up for others. There is some talk at this point of potentially being able to support more statewide tribes in movements for smoke-free air. But, you know, if that's something that Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board would be interested in, you know, we're always happy to extend our reach as far as we can. I will say the National Indian Health Board in 2016, I presented or sponsored a resolution to get them on board supporting smoke-free air and tobacco policy and prevention efforts. So there is a resolution if you search by keyword in the NIHB resolutions website that you can hit that. We've heard from some tribes that that is helpful for them in their advocacy work locally. Also, I've had other tribes reach out to me and just say, hey, I'm presenting to our tribal council to make a smoke-free casino or a smoke-free policy reservation-wide. Can we get a statement from the Chunli Coalition just supporting us? And we're always happy to provide that as well. So don't be afraid to reach out. We're here to support each other, and it's hard work, but it is also very rewarding work once you see that success and all of your hard work pay off.
Well, thank you so much, Ray. Doesn't look like we have any more questions, so at this time I want to thank you. We appreciate all the information that you're providing for not just the health board itself, but everyone across the Great Plains region who is tuning into this webinar. So thank you. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Eugene.
Now at this time, we'll go ahead and switch gears, and we'll be presenting with our next presenter, who is Dawn Arkinson. Dawn Arkinson is the breast and cervical cancer early detection program patient navigator, and she'll be sharing information about the patient navigation work through Honor Every Woman. So at this time, I'll go ahead and turn the keys over to Dawn. And Dawn, whenever you're ready.
I
Just
had to unmute myself. Sorry about that. Thank you, Eugene. I'm actually not the patient navigator anymore, although I'm still doing patient navigation work. I'm now the program coordinator for Honor Every Woman. But I'm still doing the patient navigation work until we hire a patient navigator. Can everybody see my screen,
yes.
my presentation?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and I hope you're all safe and healthy. As Eugene said, my name is Dawn Arkinson, and I'm the program coordinator for the Great Plains Breast and Cervical Cancer Early Detection Program, also called Honor Every Woman. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about our program, Honor Every Woman. I will talk a little bit about what we do, who is eligible, and what our goals are. Then I'm going to talk about patient navigation and how important it is to early detection as a preventative measure. I will also talk about Harold P. Freeman, who championed the patient navigation concept. The Great Plains Tribal Leaders Health Board was awarded a 5-year cooperative agreement with the CDC to help increase the breast and cervical cancer screening rate in the Great Plains. Our objective is to provide breast and cervical cancer screenings to low-income American Indian and Alaskan Native women in North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Iowa. Our staff consists of Tinka Duran, who's our Director of Prevention Programs, Kelly LeBeau, who is the Program Manager, myself, the Program Coordinator, Richard Musso, who is the Data Manager, and we are in the process of hiring a patient navigator. At this point in time, that position is vacant. Women eligible for our program include women whose income falls below 250% of the federal poverty level, who are uninsured or underinsured, and do not have Medicaid or Medicare. These women need to be between the ages of 21 to 64 for cervical cancer and 40 to 65 for breast cancer. Anyone under 40 must be symptomatic or have a family history of breast cancer. These are the program goals that the GPBCEP is working on within the Great Plains tribes in the 4-state area by increasing screenings for breast and cervical cancer. To increase these screenings is to work with the tribes in these areas by giving them assistance. This would be to help them increase evidence-based interventions, which are called EBIs. There are 3 EBIs that will be focused on. The first one is increasing client demand, and this is done by client reminders, group education, one-on-one education, and using small media. The second one is increasing client access, which is done by reducing structural barriers, such as transportation costs and reducing out-of-pocket costs. The third one is increasing provider delivery, which includes provider reminders and provider assessments, which is the screening process. In the long term, we have high hopes of reducing cancer morbidity and mortality rates among American Indian and Alaskan Native women in the Great Plains area, as well as reduce disparities in cancer incidence and mortality. At each stage in our program, Honor Every Woman focuses on screening, obtaining diagnostic services, and referring for treatment services when necessary. In doing that, we focus on 3 aspects of obtaining medical assistance: the patient, the health system, and the communities in which these 2 entities interact. Honor Every Woman is working on reducing structural barriers that stand in the way or complicate eligible women's access to breast and cervical cancer screening. We utilize patient navigation to complete this piece, as well as implementing evidence-based interventions at a health systems level, like creating and promoting screening reminders to be utilized in the community. In addressing how the patient and the health system work together, we must address the community. We do this through educational campaigns, social media involvement, and listening to the demand and the needs of the community in order to increase access to breast and cervical cancer screenings. Here we have health systems changes, which includes direct screening, patient navigation, and evidence-based interventions. Again, we call those EBIs. Direct screenings are mammograms, pap smears and pap tests, clinical breast exams, and diagnostics. This does not include treatment services. Patient navigation encompasses two groups of women, those that are eligible to receive program paid screenings, as well as low-income women who are uninsured. Low-income women who are insured. It is our program goal to focus on women who might not get screened otherwise. Patient navigation is used to reduce barriers to screening and provide follow-up, as well as navigating women to the appropriate location to be screened. Comprehensive navigation includes assessing and resolving barriers, providing education and support, tracking and follow-up for women who have been screened or will be getting screened, multiple contacts between patient and navigator, and identifying outcomes of the patient navigation. EBIs include reducing structural barriers such as transportation, provider reminder systems, increasing client demand by providing client reminders, group education, one-on-one education, and small media. Dr. Harold P. Freeman initiated the first patient navigation program at the Harlem Hospital in New York City in 1990. Dr. Freeman told the ASCO Post, "The concept of patient navigation came to me when I was the national president of the American Cancer Society from 1988 to 1989. I had the opportunity to hold national hearings on cancer in the poor, from which the published document, Report to the Nation on Cancer in the Poor, was developed. The hearings were conducted in 7 American cities. The testimony was primarily from poor people of all ethnic groups who had been diagnosed with cancer." After completing his residency at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, Harold P. Freeman, MD, arrived at Harlem Hospital Center in 1967, where the overwhelming majority of his patients presented with late-stage disease. That early experience with underserved patients would shape his career as one of the nation's most preeminent oncologists on the subject of poverty and cancer. So the patient navigator is a person who helps guide a patient through the healthcare system. This includes help going through the screening, diagnosis, treatment, and follow-up of a medical condition, such as cancer. A patient navigator helps patients communicate with their healthcare providers so they get the information they need to make decisions about their healthcare. Patient navigators may also help patients set up appointments for doctor visits and medical tests and get financial, legal, and social support. The lay navigator acts as a link between patients and care providers to facilitate clinical and supportive care services. The role is that of a single point of contact among referring providers, patients, and other clinical caregivers for the purpose of empowering patients in dealing with the disease and the treatment. It is not required for a lay navigator to have any medical training, However, they may go through training to become certified. Barriers to healthcare are situations that make getting treated difficult. Patient barriers are related to age, race, and low socioeconomical status. Patient navigation is a community-based service delivery intervention designed to promote access to timely diagnosis and treatment of cancer and other chronic diseases by eliminating barriers to care. The core function of patient navigation is the elimination of barriers to timely care across all segments of the healthcare continuum. This function is most effectively carried out through a one-on-one relationship between the navigator and the patient. Patient navigation is a patient-centric healthcare service delivery model. The focus of navigation is to promote the timely movement of an individual patient through an often complex healthcare continuum. An individual's journey through this continuum begins in the neighborhood where he or she lives, to a medical setting where an abnormality is detected, a diagnosis is made, and then treatment is rendered. The journey continues from rehabilitation and survivorship to the end of life. Here's a list of what patient navigation objectives are. To notify screening results to the patient within 30 days of the screening date. To notify the patient of abnormal screening results within 24 hours of receipt by the provider's staff. The completion of a diagnostic workup for the patient within 60 days of initial screening date. The initiation of treatment within 60 days of the date of the diagnosis of cancer. The completion of diagnostic workup for 100% of abnormal screens. The initiation of treatment for the patient for 100% of diagnosis of CIN2, CIN3, CIS, and cervical cancer. Also, the initiation of treatment for 100% diagnosis of DCIS, LCIS, and invasive breast cancer. Honor Every Woman navigation focuses on two phases of patients' healthcare journey: screening and diagnosis. In order to address the issues of patients in these phases, navigators must be familiar with the scope of issues that patients may face in their interactions with the healthcare system during screening and diagnosis of breast and cervical cancer. Also, to recruit American Indian Alaskan Native women to sign up and receive mammograms and Pap tests through attending local health fairs and appropriate community events. Ensure enrollment and consent forms and pledge cards are brought to all appropriate events, in addition to educational materials. To enroll women in the Honor Every Woman program in order to receive Pap tests, HPV tests, and mammograms according to the United States Preventative Service Task Force recommendations. These recommendations are based on average risk women. If clients present family histories of breast cancer or cervical cancer in a first-degree relative, which is a mother or a sister, then we encourage them to discuss an alternative screening schedule with their medical provider. We document all enrollments using the eligibility form and the screening and enrollment form and submit it to Administrative Office of the facility following the contract specifications. All professional interactions with enrollees will be documented using the patient navigation tracking system. For more information on the Harold P. Freeman Patient Navigation Training, please visit www.hpfreemanpni.org. And this, the Harold P. Freeman Patient Navigation Institute is located in New York City. And my team and I had the opportunity to go and participate in this training, and it was worth it. I, as a patient navigator, I learned a lot of things about patient navigation, and Harold P. Freeman has become kind of one of my idols now. The George Washington University also has a training, and their training is free, and it's an online training. The information to their website is here, and will be included in the slides. So if you want to visit that website and take a look at what kind of training that they have to offer, for those of you who might be interested in taking a patient navigation training, it is a little time consuming, but it's something that you can also do on your own time. And then the Patient Navigator Training Collaborative is based in Denver, Colorado, and their website is here. It's patientnavigatortraining.org. And I also had an opportunity to take that training, which I feel like I benefited greatly from that. And please feel free to contact anyone on our staff if you need any further information. And so our information is here. And I thank you all for joining me today. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that, Dawn, for all the important information that you shared. At this time, we will go ahead and open this up to Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the question box. And also, we are unmuting all attendees. If you have a question and you want to use your microphone, you can do that as well. You just have to unmute yourself on the little microphone icon that's below. So we got someone saying that the link isn't working. The hpfreemanpni.org.
I don't know what to do about that.
Well, so just to clarify, it's hpfreemanpni.org. Is that correct?
hpfreemanpni.org.
Okay. Yep. So what is probably happening is that you're probably copying the HTTP. So if you just put the hpfreemanpni.org, I think you might have a little bit more success with that. There was other people from yesterday's conversation that had an issue trying to utilize a link that was provided, and it didn't allow them to do so. So you got to take out the first portion of the URL. And if not, we're still going to be providing this information afterwards in our handouts. So I think that might be a better option as well.
Actually, this is Tinka. Don's handout is in the handouts, and that should provide, it's a PDF, but you can also Google Harold Freeman Patient Navigation, and that should give you the website as well. But
Yep.
The handout for Don and everybody else's presentations is in the handouts. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Tinka. So if there are no questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up everything, but I want to remind everyone that the SurveyMonkey link to fill out an evaluation feedback form for us is in the chat box. If anyone is having troubles with that, let me know. And what we can do is figure out another means of getting you that survey so that you can be entered into our drawing for tomorrow's prize, which is what I'll like to share at this point with everyone. So if you give me 1 second, I'll go ahead and show what our next prize will be. So I don't know if anyone can see my screen, but this one was from yesterday, and this was won by Viola LaFontaine with the North Dakota Trenton Service Area. And we do have our next prize, which is this, I believe it's a laptop case, but it is by Pendleton. So if you would like to be entered into the drawing, please fill out the survey. And you have, I think till midnight to fill out our survey. So please, after this call, just click the survey link, fill it out, then you'll automatically be entered into the drawing. And tomorrow we'll be announcing the winners for that. And I want to remind everyone that our calls are being recorded, so that if anyone would like a copy or need anything for a copy for someone else that may have missed it, we'll go ahead and be providing that information as well. So with that being said, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Keep in mind, we do have our final last day tomorrow of our conference, and it'll begin on the same time. So it'll be 1 p.m., and that's with Mountain Time Zone. And Central Office might be a little bit different, but we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow and tomorrow's call. So thank you, everyone.
Are we staying on or?